Okay, so good evening to all of you, or good afternoon, or good morning, depending on where you are from today. So I am here to discuss the interoperability lab is under Toolkit. So this is part of the AeHIN coil webinar, where our goal is to discuss the various things that interoperability labs across the region is doing. So I'm Philip Zuniga. Next slide. So just a disclaimer, all the views and opinions expressed are personal and does not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of the various organizations that I represent. Also, I would like to acknowledge that many things that I will be presenting today were done in collaboration with the various partners that we have. So AeHIN and COIL is a huge community, and many of the work that I will be sharing right now are done in collaboration with them. So they will be acknowledged as needed during the presentation. So for tonight, so what are we going to discuss? So we are going to discuss number one, the importance of interoperability. So why do we need interoperability in digital health? That's the first one. The second one is we will discuss how do we attain interoperability. So at SIL-Asia, we have looked at examples from various countries, and although the experiences from other countries are different with one another, we have seen some common ground that we are going to share later. And then number three, we will be discussing what an interoperability lab is. And finally, number four, and the main part of this discussion is how do we start with an interoperability lab. So we have here, I see here some representatives from countries, from health. I see him some represent in this call, some representatives from health facilities. So we will discuss how do we actually start setting up an interoperability lab. So many of us here are already familiar with the AeHIN Mind the Gaps framework. So we know that um, in AeHIN, we have seen that the four things that a country needs in order to set up their digital health infrastructure are governance, architecture, program management, and the fourth one is standards and interoperability. So I think we have repeatedly here AeHIN discuss about this, and we have seen success stories across the region. For tonight, of course, we will be focusing with the standards and interoperability because obviously we will be talking about interoperability labs, so the focus is on standards and interoperability. At the same time, just to further reinforce, the WHO ITU Digital Health Toolkit, so we are also familiar with this. We know that according to the WHO and ITU, there are 7 things that a country needs to set up for a robust digital health structure. So there's leadership and governance, there's strategy and investment, services and applications, infrastructure, legislation and workforce. And they also mentioned standards and interoperability. So we have seen repeatedly the importance of standards and interoperability when it comes to digital health. So before we move forward, I think it will be good to know what interoperability is. So to simplify, interoperability is the capability of software systems to share data with one another. So we have two software systems. We want them to share data with one another. If they can do that, then we say that they are interoperable. And we know that in healthcare, this is very important. As patients, we want to be able to see our patient record, our medicine records, our social insurance records, our hospital records. We want to see them being shared by the various by the various health facilities. At the same time, at the government level, they want to see how public health indicators are being collected by facilities. So interoperability is very important when it comes to healthcare. And of course, we often hear right now the buzzword universal health coverage, and interoperability is a vital component of UHC, especially as we are moving from a hierarchical infrastructure, so from this one to a more patient-centered health system infrastructure. So before I move to the next slide, let's first define what is UHC. UHC, so Universal Health Coverage, is the aspiration for everyone such that a patient should be able to go to any health facility, anytime, anywhere, and he should receive the same quality of care with no financial burden. So let's look at that definition again. If you are a patient, you should be able to choose any facility where you want to go into. So if we have a patient here, he should be able to go to any facility anytime and anywhere. And that can only happen if there's interoperability in the health data of the patient. Because if there's no interoperability in the health data, then it will be very hard for you to bring your data to the different facilities. So from what we are seeing, especially right now, countries all over the region are looking at UHC, and one ingredient that is very important for them to attain UHC is interoperability of their digital health systems. So maybe the question now is how do we attain interoperability? Of course, number one, there's governance. There should be proper policies and governance mechanism that will be set up to ensure that an interoperable infrastructure can be set up. So part of that governance is number one, development of a national e-health strategy. Number two, there should be data sharing policies. Number three, there should be an identification of proper digital health standards. So those things, they are done at the governance level. There should be, the government should lead the crafting of policies that will enable us to have interoperability. Number two is architecture is important. We cannot just implement solutions without thinking how they will connect with one another in the future. It is important for us to design and implement an architecture that will enable interoperability and prevent silos among the different systems. Number three is program management. There should be people who will manage the digital health, and they must include interoperability as one of their key areas of management. So if you are seeing, we are repeating gaps again: governance, architecture, program management. And finally, we should look at the technology aspects of the standards and interoperability, because at the end of the day, having interoperable systems is a technology problem. Okay, because we have systems that we need to connect with one another. So how do we do that? Number one, software developer teams should be able to develop solutions that can use the mandate and standards and can follow the architecture that was defined. So it is important for the software developer teams to be able to understand the standards, to be able to implement them. That's the first one. Number two, there should be tools that enable faster adoption of interoperable solutions. It is very hard for us to implement interoperable solutions. There must be support, there must be tools that we can use so that we can have faster adoption. Number three is that there should be testing that will be done to ensure that solutions that are being deployed are standards-based. So we should do conformance testing, interoperability testing. So those things are important for us to attain interoperability. And number four, training should be conducted so that software developer teams can easily adapt to the current standard. So there should be training. Okay, so there should be software teams should be able to implement solutions. There should be tools. There should be tests, and there should be training. So these are uh, important for us to have interoperable solutions at that technology level. So who will now provide us with this capacity? So who will help the teams develop the solution? Who will develop the tools that we can use to adopt interoperable solutions? Who should do the tests? And who should conduct the trainings? This is where the interoperability lab will come in. Okay? So an interoperability lab is a safe space where government, academe, industry, and innovators can come together to discuss, test, and work on interoperable solutions. So that is the purpose of an interoperability lab. So if you will notice, I highlighted some keywords: teams, tools, tests, and trainings. In the context of interoperability labs, we call these four things as the four T's. So this is teaming, tooling, testing, and training. So these are the four things that an interoperability lab usually does. So it it works with teams to develop solutions that can use the mandated standard. It develops tools. So when we say tools, it's not only the technique, the software tools, but knowledge materials, publications, national profiles. So those are also tools that can be used to adapt interoperable solutions. This will also be test. So an interoperability lab also conducts testing. And finally, training. So one important function of an interoperability lab is it conducts training to the various software developer teams so that it will be easier for them to adapt the standards. So we now look at the history of SIL-A. So in 2015, the Asia eHealth Information Network, so we are all familiar here with AeHIN, identified the need to have a reference interoperability lab. So because during those times, I think AeHIN was thinking, how can we help countries to have interoperable solutions? So one of the ideas that came was to develop an interoperability lab similar to other interoperability labs in other regions. So for AeHIN to further understand what an interoperability lab is, they look at the possibility of setting up one first. So that is the regional reference lab. So the regional reference lab will be like the pilot. So it will show to AeHIN what an interoperability lab is in action. It will enable AeHIN to pool resources so that the various international experts will be so that we can bring in the various international experts to train the reference lab. At the same time, the support from ADB came in to ensure that the lab will have enough resources and they will be able to bring capacity in the region. So ADB at that time is also looking at digital health as a possible investment to countries. So together with ADB, AeHIN and ADB, they work together to set up the regional interoperability lab. So right now, the regional reference lab is under the Interoperability Lab Asia. So that is the history. SIL-Asia was established to provide an example of how an interoperability lab will work. So when SIL-Asia was established in 2017, there were 3 other interoperability labs, digital health interoperability labs in the world. So there was the Medic Lab, which was a university-based laboratory from the Mohawk University in Canada. So they were developing solutions, particularly in patient registries, and they were the first interoperability lab in the world. And then the Medic Lab, they work with the Gembi Lab. So the Gembi Lab was the second interoperability lab. So they were based in South Africa. So if you are familiar with Open HIM, Open Health Integrator Mediator, so they were the ones who developed that. They are also very active in the Open HIE community. Yeah, so the Gembi Lab was established to support interoperability in the African region. So the third lab, as I have mentioned earlier, that was established is the Standards and Interoperability Lab Asia. So the purpose of the lab is to provide support to various countries in the Asia Pacific region. So yeah, so we were established, and then we were supported by Gembi Lab and Medic Lab because yeah, we were the youngest lab at that time. So what were the mandate of SIL-Asia? So SIL-Asia was established, number one, to engage with countries around the region. So it is important for the lab to work with countries in the Asia Pacific region because we want to we want to introduce the concept of interoperability of standards to the countries across the region. So that's one thing. Number two, and I think this is the most important mandate of SIL-Asia, is to provide capacity building. So we were conducting webinars, we were conducting trainings, we were conducting capacity building activities, we were doing internships for countries across the region. Number three, we have another mandate of the lab is to bring in experts to support countries in the region. So we brought in experts in HL75 to support countries across the region. So we brought in terminology services people so that they can support us. And finally, another mandate of the lab is to develop public goods. So we have developed publications, knowledge material, and we have developed tools and starter toolkits that can be used by countries across the region. So those are the things that SIL-Asia was mandated to do when we were established in 2017. So moving forward, so we are now in 2021, I think SIL-Asia have supported around 12 to 13 countries across the region. So we have supported, of course, the Philippines, Vietnam, Taiwan. So we have conducted capacity building activities with Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia. We have worked closely with Nepal with the support of GIZ. We are supporting Laos right now in conducting a convergence workshop. We have supported Cambodia via capacity building. We are also working with Uzbekistan right now. So it's a Central Asian country. So we have just finished conducting training with them. And we have also supported the development of an enterprise architecture for Uzbekistan. We have also been working with Myanmar via training, Bhutan via training, and Sri Lanka. So we have seen during the past 4 years, even though during the pandemic everything was done online, we have continued trying to engage with countries across the region. So maybe you will ask yourself, so why are we engaging countries? Why are we telling countries to set up their own interoperability labs? We are doing this because we are seeing the benefits of having an in-country interoperability lab. So what are those benefits? Number one, it's risk mitigation. Solutions can be tested in a smaller scale rather than testing them on a bigger scale. So for example, you have an EMR and you want to deploy it nationally. Of course, that will be risky because that's a very huge project. So before deploying something, before testing something on a bigger scale, a lab can come in to test it in a laboratory setting. So that's one benefit that we can get from an in-country interoperability lab. Next, an interoperability lab can also be a source of shared resources. So we know that for many countries in the region, the resources in health is not that much. And an interoperability lab can come in to ensure that the few resources that we have can be shared properly across government, industry, and academia. Next one, an interoperability lab is also a safe space. So it can provide a safe space where technology providers, government, innovators, and discuss solutions without the limitations of being in a bureaucracy. So, for example, I am from government and I want to test blockchain, for example. If I will be doing that in a normal government setting, then before I can do the test, I need to pass by several approvals from government because that's how bureaucracy works. Or if I am a private company, I want to test how blockchain works. I will need to request money first from the company before I can do the testing. The interoperability lab can do the testing, can provide a safe space for these technologies to be tested first and to be seen first in a shared manner. Public goods. So another benefit of an interoperability lab is it can generate public goods that can be shared by all parties. And finally, it can also generate cost savings. So by testing solutions, an interoperability lab can help reduce the cost of procuring or developing electronic medical record systems. So before we procure a system, we can first have it tested by an interoperability lab so that we can know whether that system is complying to our standards, to our protocols. So, because if we do that, if we don't do the testing before procuring it, then it will be a cost for the organization. So by transferring the responsibility of testing to an interoperability lab, and by doing it before procuring the system, that will actually help us reduce the cost. So we are now here. So at AeHIN, so the first stage was to set up a reference interoperability lab. So we have already done that with HILA. The next step is to encourage countries across the region to develop their own in-country interoperability labs. So we are asking Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, the Philippines to develop their own labs. And we know when we work with AeHIN, we are familiar that in AeHIN, you don't do anything, you don't do things alone. We always work in communities. So AeHIN, they consider what they say is that instead of the in-country labs being developed on their own, is that we form a community for those labs so that they can share knowledge, information with one another. So that is the AeHIN community of interoperability labs. So yeah, so we are building a community, and now I think the main question for our webinar tonight is, yeah, we know interoperability is important. We know that we can have benefits from having an interoperability lab. We know that there is a community that will support us when we set up an interoperability lab. So the most important question right now is, how do we start setting up an interoperability lab? Is it something that we set up tomorrow, or is it something that we need to plan first before we set up? So at this stage, I will be sharing to you the SIL-Asia cooperation framework in setting up an interoperability lab. So at SIL-Asia, so we understand that our mandate is to support AeHIN in setting up interoperability labs across the region. So to make a more organized way of setting up a lab, we developed this cooperation framework. So what is this cooperation framework? So first, let's define what cooperation is. Cooperation is the collaborative development of new solutions So when we say solution, it can be an organization, it can be services, it can be products, together with experts and stakeholders. So the main idea with co-creation is we will develop something together. The countries, the experts, the community, we will work together to develop the various in-country interoperability labs. So what are the 8 concepts in the cooperation framework? Number 1, ideas are shared. So all the ideas that we have in developing the lab, we share that rather than keeping it. Number 2, responsibilities are distributed. When we develop a lab, when we set up an in-country lab, the responsibility of doing that is not limited to the country itself. We share our responsibilities, so we provide support, we provide technical assistance to ensure that the setting up of the lab will be successful. And number 3, and this is what I like about AeHIN, creation is made by the community. So everything here, there's always a communal way of doing things. So rather than individuals setting up the lab, there's always a community that will help the individuals to set up the lab. Okay, so the co-creation process that we have has 3 components: co-realization, co-building, co-learning. So we begin with co-realization. Co-realization is always the first phase that we use when we set up the lab. And this is usually the hardest phase. Okay, so if you are planning to set up an interoperability lab, then I suggest that you focus on the core realization part first and you devote time in it. Because what you will do during the core realization part will have impact on the other phases. So this is the phase where organizations interested to set up a lab conceptualizes the identity of the lab. So if we will be setting up an interoperability lab, we don't do that quickly. We should identify what will be the identity of the lab. Okay? Will it be a testing lab? Will it be a development lab? Will it be a training lab? So we have to carefully identify that identity, because if we don't do that, then there will be higher risk for the interoperability lab to fail. So the process of realization involves planning and brainstorming to help the organization define the lab's purpose based on the health sector's strength and priority area. So realization involves a lot of planning and brainstorming. So there will be workshops, there will be meetings before you actually develop the concept of the lab. So one of the first things that we usually do when we do our realization is we review the national digital health landscape. So we review what is present right now in the country. So when we were supporting Nepal in developing their own interoperability lab, the first thing we did was to have a situational review of their current e-health infrastructure. So we created a report indicating that review. So because we have to understand what are the gaps that the digital health, what are the digital health gaps are present in this country. So do they have a problem in EMRs? Do they have a problem in adopting standards? Do they have a problem in infrastructure? So we need to identify a gap. Okay? So once we have identified those gaps, that is where the lab will come in. So we will identify the gaps where the lab can make most impact within the country's digital health landscape. Because again, as I mentioned earlier, oftentimes our resources are limited. So we don't have an infinite amount of resources. So given that we have a very limited amount of resource, we have to identify an area where the lab can make most impact. So we have to identify which pain point will it be where the lab will focus on. the lab will not be able to solve all of the pain points because that will be very hard and that will be very costly. But we need to identify where will the lab have its most impact. So once we have done that, we can now define the vision and mission for the lab. So we will identify what will be the vision of the lab. So when we say vision, the idea here is where will the lab be 5 years from now? So the various stakeholders should decide what do you see what will be the role of that lab 5 years from now? Because from that vision, we can now identify the mission. So how will the interoperability lab achieve its vision? So from having a vision, we will now have the mission. So we will now list down activities. We will now think how the lab will achieve of the vision. And finally, number 3, we will think of the purpose. We have a vision, we have a mission. We now think, what will be the purpose of the lab? What will be the actual services the lab will offer? Because that will define the identity of the lab. So earlier I mentioned about the 4 T's. We do training, testing, tooling, and teaming. Those are 4 big things, and it will be very hard for a lab to focus on all of those 4 things. Okay? Oftentimes, as what we have seen in countries in the region, what labs will focus on one thing because that thing will be the most important. That is the gap where they are seeing where the biggest gap and the biggest pain point is right now. So that is where the lab is focusing in. So it is important for us to identify that purpose. So here are some of the common purpose that we have seen from the labs across the region. Number 1, there are labs that are focusing on testing and software benchmarking. So I know that the Vietnam Interoperability Lab is focusing on testing. So that's one thing. There are labs that will focus on training and capacity building. So instead of developing solutions, there are interoperability labs that conduct training and capacity building in the different software developers in the country. So that's another use case. There are some labs that are providing technical support. So they are focusing on developing solutions. That's another use case. And number 4, there is we can have a lab that will serve as a repository of various standards, of various documentation. That's another use case. So it is important for us. So if we will be setting up a lab, it is important for us to know what the use cases of the lab will be. So just to give you an example, so when the Vietnam Testing Center was established in 2018, they were clear that the focus will be on having a testing center. Okay, so when they were set up, the training that they had was focused on testing and benchmarking of software. We have also the Standards and Interoperability Lab Thailand. So they are focusing on 807 Fire. They are looking at how they can expand 807 Fire usage in the country. So that is their focus. So we can see them supporting the increase in adoption of 807 Fire, and of course, the Thai Health Information Standards Development Center, so that is and the Thai medicine terminology. So those things we are seeing the Thai Interoperability Lab to focus on those things. We also have the Standards and Interoperability Lab Taiwan. And from what we have seen, they are focusing on being a research center on smart healthcare. So that's the focus that they are looking at. So as you can see, each interoperability lab, although they are interoperability labs, they are doing different things and they are looking at different purposes. Okay, so if we have here people who are interested in setting up a lab, it is important for us to know what will be the purpose for that lab. Next thing, another thing that we have to consider is how do we set up the lab? Do we set it up as part of government? So there are different labs. For example, the Interoperability Lab in Nepal. So we are seeing that they are setting it up under the Ministry of Health. So they will be under the government. There are labs that are under academe. So they are under universities. So for example, that I1 lab, they are under the university. So that's another possible setup. Interoperability labs can also be based in health facilities, or they can be a standalone organization. So they are independent from government, academe, from private sector. So they are standalone. And sorry, this will be development. So another possibility, just like SIL-Asia, the lab is supported by development agencies. That's another thing. Another thing that the lab should identify is they should identify the target audience for the lab. They should know who will be their clients. Will they be working with government entirely? Will they work with private sector, or will they work with public health facilities? So you once you have identified your purpose, and once you have identified your structure, it will be easy for you to identify who your target audience will be. Finally, we are still in the core realization phase. So I told you earlier, this is actually the hardest phase, because we have to plan. We have to think about before we implement the lab. So we have to identify lab governance. So how will the lab be organized, and what will be the governance structure? Okay, so I will be sharing with you the governance structure that we have at SIL-Asia. So let me show this to you. So at SIL-Asia, so this is our governance structure. So we have a governance group that basically helps us define our direction at the lab. So as I mentioned earlier, since we are supported and funded by EDB, so we have EDB people at our governance structure. So they define our direction. And we have a strategic advisor. So we acknowledge AeHIN to be an important partner. Basically, we came from AeHIN. So we recognize that on the strategy level, it is important for us to look at how the direction that AeHIN will be giving us. And then we have the experts. So right now, our lab, SIL-Asia, so we have 8 experts. So we have identified experts based on the needs of the lab. So I am the director of the lab, so I do the day-to-day operations. So we have Dr. Raymond Sarmiento as our clinical expert. So we have a clinician at the lab who will define the clinical stuff. We have a health systems expert. So we have here Roseanne Zuniga, who is our expert in EMRs, in EHRs. We have a web technologist expert. We have an emerging technologist expert, because we feel that it is important for us to always look at what the latest emerging technology is. We have programmers, we have testers, and we also have a communication person, because we realize that interoperability, although it is a technical problem, it is also a communication problem. So that's why we have Christine, who is helping us on the communication aspect of the lab. Aside from those, SIL-Asia is very lucky because we have partners. We have been partnering with experts ever since, and we have been constantly working with them to further improve our capability in supporting the region. So going back to my slide, so we need to have a clear governance structure for the lab. And then another part of the core realization phase is, of course, we need to determine the resources for the lab. So when we say resources, we need to know, where will the financial resources come from? Where will the money that will support the lab will come from? it be from government? Will it be from private sector? Are we developing grants that will be funded by development agencies? Will we be a corporation or a revenue generating entity? So of course it is important for us to identify where will that money come from. And next one, we need to develop a budget. So the budget will depend on the resources that we need. So and the resources that we need will depend on what our purposes are. If we will be a development lab, a software development lab, then we will need to hire programmers. If we will be hiring programmers, then we will need to allot budget for programmers. If we will be a capacity building lab, then we will need to hire trainers. For us to hire trainers, we need to put them on our budget. So for each country, the budget and the financial resources will be different because again, there will be different problems that will be solved. We need to identify human resources. So how many people do we need? At SIL-Asia, since our focus is on developing tools and doing capacity building, we felt that having 8 people with specialized capacity, so we have a very good programmer, we have a very good tester, we have a very good training team. So we feel that we don't need a lot of people. So we only need 8 people to do the work. So that's our requirement. Again, that will be different for other countries. So depending on what problem you are trying to solve, that is where your human resources list will come from. And then finally, we need physical resources. Where will the physical lab be? Number one, the question is, will there be a physical lab? So will we have an actual office for the lab? The second question is, what are the equipment needed? So for the first question, for the physical lab, so we have SIL-Asia, we actually have an actual office space. It's not a large office space. I think the size is around 60 square meters. So we just have a long table where we can do conferences, where we can do meetings, and we have another table where we can do our development work. Basically, that is that thing that you can see at our office if you will be able to visit that. So it's a small space. Of course, we had the COVID-19 pandemic, and actually it's already around a year since we have visited our office. But yeah, we are still surviving. So maybe even if we don't have a physical office, an interoperability lab can still survive. Lastly, we need to develop a work plan. So what are the things that will be done by the lab within the next 2 to 3 years? So again, this is based on your purpose. And your purpose will be based on the gaps that you have identified. So that is that will be the core realization phase. We have to plan first before we do the implementation. Next, the next thing we do is co-building. So in this phase, SIL-Asia and the local lab will work together to build the laboratory. Again, I want to emphasize, you will be working together. You will be working with COIL. You will be working with the whole AeHIN community. We will be able to support you in developing EORs, in developing policy support. So those things. So that's why we call it co-building, because this is something that we do together. Another component of co-building is doing capacity building. So once you have decided that you will be doing a lab, SIL-Asia has a capacity building program that we can share to you so that you will be able to increase your capacity for the lab. So we have governance workshops, we have architecture workshops, and our focus, of course, is standard and interoperability workshops. So we provide capacity building in HL7 Fire, in IHE, in testing. So in 2018, when we set up the interoperability lab in Vietnam, so we brought them in. So we they went to Manila to do capacity building. So we had a 3-day workshop with them. in 2019, we had interns from the Taiwan Interoperability Lab. So they were with us, I think, for 6 weeks. So we conducted internship with them. So they saw how we function. We conducted daily lectures. So yeah, we can also do internships. And right now, since we are in a pandemic, we can also do online capacity building. So we have just completed our capacity building workshop with Nepal, and it was done completely online. So this is again something that can be done. Another important part of co-building is working with experts. It is important for you to work with experts on your first projects because, of course, they are the experts and we will learn a lot from them. So at our lab, when we work on the DHISO fire integrator, we work with experts from DHISO and experts from fire. So that's very important. And another thing, we need to develop a manual of operation. So basically, this is a list of things that the lab will do. Finally, we have co-learning. So after we have developed the vision for the lab, we have built the lab, the last thing we do is we learn. We jointly learn about the experience of the lab. It is important for us to learn the best practices, the failures, and the mistakes. Again, in AeHIN, we always share information with one another. So this is an important part of our framework. There should also be a proper monitoring and evaluation framework. So you should be able to monitor if you are progressing. That's another thing. And finally, it is important for us to share everything that we are doing to the general community. So either we develop wikis, we develop blogs, we have a tools repository. So I think that's one thing that we should do. So at SIL-Asia, everything we do, we put it in our wiki. So I will be sharing later our wiki so that you can look at it. So we share everything and we try to document everything so that it can be seen by the community. So yeah, I am very excited to work with you guys on as you set up your lab. So let's build your lab. And thank you very much. So I think we can now take questions.
Thank you for presentation, Sir Philip. We are now open for questions. Please feel free to type your question in the chat box. And our first question is, in your lab, do you develop and implement national standards codes, your own phaser or other resource for physical transfer of documents and or structure format individual data, or do you coordinate and align across countries?
This is a good question. So at SIL-Asia, we were actually heavily involved in the COVID-19 response for the Philippines. So we actually developed a national fire profile for COVID response in the country because at that time, our country needed all the support it can get. So we came in, we supported the country in developing our own national profile. So yeah, so and then I think we were able to support data sharing because of that. Regarding coordination and alignment across countries, this is a good thing. So the purpose of COIL, of the Community of Interoperability Labs, is to share information across countries. So once we have the various interoperability labs, we can now start sharing information with them. Sharing of data, so I think in light with COVID-19, this is a very important thing. So we are looking at the IPS, the International Patient Summary Profile, as a possible tool that we can use to share data across countries in the region. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. Are there other questions? So we have a question from the Baguio General Hospital. So for the government, can DOH set up a lab? Yeah, this is a very good question. Actually, yeah, I think before the pandemic, there were actually plans of setting up a Philippine interoperability lab. So we already had meeting with teammates. We were already ready to support. However, the pandemic came in, so of course we were all hands on deck on the pandemic. So the plan of having a Philippine lab aside from Thailand was didn't progress. However, I think as we move to UHC and as we move further away from the pandemic, I think DOH will be I believe that they will be looking at finally setting up that lab. Over. Raymond has a very good question. Does SIL-Asia have open source code and SQL files for institutions to build their own file servers? Actually, we don't build a file server. However, we support the use of open source file servers. So I will be sharing quickly our lab website. So in our lab website, we have, I will be sharing it via chat so that everyone can access it. In our lab website, we have shared information on how people can set up their own happy file server. So we have those tools. We also have a Docker version. So if you want to use Docker, you can just download it and there will be a set of instructions that you can review. Yeah, we have those things at our website that you can look at. This is a very good question. Have you come across a hospital who wanted to create an interoperability lab in their hospital to be able to test certain programs prior to procuring? So, well, personally, I haven't seen that yet. However, during the early days of SIL-Asia, we were based at the Philippine General Hospital, and we were seeing that, the hospital was buying software that are not that does not fit in to their current ecosystem, and they will request the developers of that software to modify their software, and that will be the cost will of course be shouldered by the hospital. So we felt that if only there was testing first, if only we could have if only we develop the TOR to indicate this standards, then it will be cheaper because the cost of modifying that will be transferred to the vendor, not to the facility. So that's why we thought that it will be good if an interoperability lab will be based on hospitals. So so that's our experience with that. Do you have a list of requirements for setting up a lab so that it can be placed for budgeting? So in our website, we have a manual of operation. So you can look at that. So the manual of operation shows the different things that the lab will need to have. So you can use that as a basis for your proposal. Did SIL-Asia work with the UP General Hospital to integrate the different EMR? So we were supposed to work with them because we were initially based at the PGH. However, because of the pandemic, again, the directions of the hospital changed. So we are currently at a reactive stage. So personally, I am not familiar of the direction that the UP General Hospital will take after the pandemic. But it will really be good if we can actually help them integrate their EMRs. Are there other questions?
Hello, is the dead and now can you hear me?
Yes, Dr. Bonsai, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Phillips, very much for giving this talk about it. Very beneficial to our to all the members in the country, and this is a good, sharing experience. I can add more on the historical about the SIL-A. Actually, it's starting by AeHIN. AeHIN has an opportunity to see the Medit lab in Canada. Several AeHIN leaders go there, and then we have a general meeting, I think, in Bali, and the representative from Medit lab come also participate, and they are agree to kind of the support the way that they already do in Canada, which is do all the 4T. And with that idea, AeHIN then working with the ADB and the University General Hospital, that how we can come with a kind of the agreement to form or to do the technology transfer from the Medilab. And at the time, we signed the MOU with the vice president of the UP University and the director of the University of Philippines General Hospitals, and the ADB. The ADB will kind of the in-cash support and also bring in the expert into the to the lab. The UP also agree to provide the UP General Hospital provide the space, the physical space, and AeHIN are going to collaborate that. And at the time, Dr. Alvin, our executive director, are kind of which is in the Philippines, collaborating with several stakeholders. It's luckily that Professor Phillips also work in the computer science in the UP, and we have Dr. Raymond in Ministry of Health Telehealth Center. So that is the kind of the original of the forming of this collaboration. We suppose that SIL-A not just only do kind of the technology transfer, but also kind of the show us how they implemented those in Philippines and also help other countries. And I think SIL-A do a very good job helping Vietnam and helping several countries to kind of to get the idea or do the technology transfer. So I would encourage every countries that are interested to kind of have. So we will have more collaboration or kind of the community of the interoperability lab. Thailand, I can give the group a little bit short history of how we get that, and we know that to get, or we don't have money. We starting with the people who have the kind of the same kind of the idea or passion on the health IT in the countries, and we luckily that we have from Siriraj Hospital. I'm in the Health System Research Institute, and we just we have an opportunity to welcome Graham Griff, which he came to Thailand in 2018 or 19 on the HIMSS Asia Packs, and that the starting point that he advocate and also stimulate the interested on the fires standard that become we after that we still working on right now in standard in SIL Thailand. We already kind of the getting we don't get the funding from any organization. We kind of define our project ourselves and do what we think is better to do for the country. So I think every country you maybe have a different way to kind of get the resources to do that. So and we can share this among our community that how we go about it. So I hope that the experience from SIL standard SIL Thailand could be shared in the near future, that how when we try to solve our problems. I think Dr. Dr. Papat wrote this that in Thailand, I think fire compliance or interoperability is not a compulsory specification to put in the TOR yet. What are we trying to do right now is to spread the awareness about the fire standard as much as possible. And I think we are doing well. There are momentum on this in the Ministry of Health and Ministry of Digital Economy and Society. Then we would like to build tools, lot of tools based on fire. So if any hospital or institutes support fire interface, they will instantly get benefit from the available tools that our current plan. I think all of you already see the chat like this. I think, thank you, Dr. Papat, to compliment it. Do you want to speak something before we close? We have 5 minutes over the time. I think several Thai standard interoperability lab, Thailand, SIL, I mean, is in this call. Dr. Rat, Nadanai, and Dr. Papat. Any last word or any question from another country that would like to kind of to act? We don't have much to share. Don't like SIL-A that has a lot of to share. We are just starting to do what we do, but we work closely with SIL-A and with our international experts. Dr. Papat, any comments?
No, really. I mean, what I would like to say, I have already put in the chat, so that's fine.
Okay. There is some question on. I think the question from Peter. Peter, we actually starting almost voluntary, and the like my people who know that the foundation is the gaps is very important, and the standard is one of standard, and interoperability is one of the gap of the country. So we gather the like-minded people who know both technical and or clinical, and forming the SIL are very emerge from that, and we still do without the incentive, only the incentive for our daily job. So, but we are trying to form the group to seek out the grant inside in-country grant to do the project that related to fire. So what is the financial commitment required to set up in Thailand? Not at all. It's just we use the several tools that AeHIN support country, like the Zoom account, and also we call sometime, and when our member file project, then we try to get all the group to brainstorm on that. We don't have still don't have the full time in SIL Thailand. Professor Philip, any comments before we close?
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Bonsai, for sharing the experience. So, yeah, we are looking forward to working with all interoperability labs across the region. So I believe this webinar series will be regular. So we will just regularly send you invites. Maybe on the next talk, we can hear from the different labs about their own experiences. Thank you very much.
Okay. So if there are any question, then thank you very much everyone to participate in that, and we will still continue to have the AeHIN webinar related to several topics, including the standard and interoperability. Thank you and good night. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.